Are small editing mistakes ruining your best wildlife photos? I've reviewed hundreds of submissions from viewers just like you, and even great shots often fall short because of just one or two fixable issues. In this video, I'll critique 3 wildlife images and show you exactly how to fix them using practical techniques I've refined over nearly 20 years in wildlife photography. I've got some great techniques to share on how to soften harsh light, enhance compositions, and much more. If you'd like a chance to have your photo critiqued in a future video, just sign up using the link below and I'll send you all the information. The first image is by Anders Freyborn, and it's a portrait of a male lion, and it's in fairly harsh light. Now, when Anders submitted this image, there was a note that said something is just not right to this image. Now, let's just evaluate this raw file, and we can then go look at the full edit and look at what is missing. So for this image, I would say the off-centered line doesn't quite work. I would say the space on the top and the space on the right-hand side aren't really contributing to the image. I think the lion being off-center is throwing me off a little bit. Now, when you are photographing a portrait and the animal is looking directly towards you, I often find placing that animal directly in the center works very well. And if you put the eyes roughly on a third line, sort of on the top part of the image, that works quite well. So I think having the eyes in this example more in a top third will work a lot better. Now, I would say there's no other distractions. This grass at the bottom here doesn't really bother me at all. I would say the light is a little bit harsh, but there are some techniques you can use to soften that harsh light. So let's have a look at this fully edited file. I would say the crop has been improved. I think it can be improved a little bit more, and also just putting the lion's eyes directly into the center will just help the image balance a little bit better. So I'm going to just crop a little bit off the right-hand side and crop a little bit away from the top. Okay, so now I mentioned earlier we wanted to put the lion's eyes on the top third, but in this example there's not enough space to do that. So I don't want to crop away the top of the head like that. I want to keep the fur at the top there. So I think in this example, perhaps this is maybe the best crop to go for. You could go a lot tighter by cropping away all of the outside of the line and really allowing the viewer to focus in on the animal. So there is that option as well. But I think for now, I'm just going to crop it in like that. Now, I agree that something is missing in this image. I would say the harsh light is taking away from the mood that could be portrayed in the scene, and the strong coloring as well. I guess personal taste, I would probably get rid of some of that color. So if I had to edit this image, let me go back to the raw file. I'm just going to crop away those areas that I mentioned earlier, bringing the eyes into the center. I might drop the exposure. I want to drop the very strong light in the scene. So I'm going to drop that exposure. Now you'll see the blacks are being blocked up there. There's some clipping blacks. But if I just raise that black slider, it's bringing back a lot more detail in that area there. I might bring back a little bit of contrast with the whites, making sure not to blow anything out. Just going to hold down Alt there. I think that's looking fairly decent. I might add a little bit of shadows to this image. I think I might even darken this a little bit more. So just already by just darkening the image and raising the blacks, we're able to get rid of a lot of that very harsh, strong contrast and that harsh light. I could also drop the highlights a little bit here. And I think where this image might benefit is taking away a lot of that character of that strong light. So what I might do here is just take a brush, just going to get rid of a lot of these bright areas on top of the lion's face here. Just drop down the exposure slightly. I might then create another brush just to bring back a little bit of exposure in this side of the lion's face, just to get rid of that very strong light there. I think for something like that. I'll perhaps add a vignette to this image. Just going to throw on a quick radial gradient here. Going to invert that, just drop down the exposure. And you can see already we've gotten rid of a lot of that very harsh light there. So that's looking a lot better. I'm then going to add a bit of light coming from the top of the image. Just going to zoom out. Going to go over the animal. Just want to emphasize and enhance that light direction a little bit there. Now just a quick adjustment to the color. I'm going to desaturate some of those greens in the background, very slightly. And then I'm actually going to drop the overall saturation. I feel like if we can just desaturate this image slightly, it'll bring a lot more mood to the image. Perhaps drop a little bit of contrast. I then will add a little bit of clarity. I'm going to just use a radial gradient instead of using a subject mask. I really only want to add clarity to the face here. I don't really want to add clarity sort of to the extremities of the image. Enhance the clarity there a little bit. Perhaps I might just add in a little bit more blacks to the image. This edit might seem a little bit rushed or all over the place. I'm trying to get to a result very quickly without wasting your time. But in my Lightroom editing course, I teach a very structured approach to photo editing that allows you to build the edit with a lot of intention. And that's all based around storytelling. And it's a very good system that I use with great effect. So if you're interested in improving your photo editing skills in Lightroom, I'll leave a link in the description. Now, what I might do here is add a color grade to the shadows. I'm going to add a slight blue tint to the shadows. Essentially, adding blue to the shadows is just creating a little bit of color contrast with the light in the scene. So that is also going to help us eliminate some of that harsh looking light in this example. So just a very subtle blue tint there in the shadows. I might warm this up slightly. I might increase the exposure slightly and maybe just decrease some of the highlights. I'm going to add a darkening effect to the bottom here, just with a linear gradient. Just going to help further draw the attention towards the lion's face. And perhaps just maybe increase some of that saturation again. One thing I might do is just zoom into the eyes. I might just brighten those eyes up a little bit. So they are in quite strong shadow there. So I'm simply just going to paint on the eye, on the right and the left, and just increase some of the exposure, not too much that it looks unnatural, but just a little bit, just to help engage the viewer a little bit more. What I might then just do is just add a little bit of vibrance and maybe some overall clarity, and perhaps just increase some of those blacks a little bit more there. So editing in harsh lights can be quite difficult, and often there's not a lot you can do, but when you've got an amazing moment like this, it's always good to take the image and try and edit afterwards. Now, what you can also try is when the light is quite harsh, you can also try convert to black and white and create a very high contrast edit that way. So that is another option you can use when the light is very harsh. But I think as far as a quick edit goes, I think that is probably where I would take the image. I might do a little bit more finessing on all of the lights coming in from the right-hand side. But I think for now, I think that's pretty decent. Let's compare it to the original edits. So you can see the original edits on the left-hand side. It's quite strong. The colors are very strong. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like perhaps the harsh light is emphasized a little bit more in the image on the left-hand side. This next image submitted by Louis Kruger. This is of a leopard in some nice long grass, and I quite enjoy the composition here. Now, when Louis submitted this image, he asked about what's the best way to crop this type of image. And also, would you go for more of a black and white edit like this one, or more of a desaturated version like this? Now, if we just look at the raw file to start with, let's have a look at how to improve this raw file. I think if I had taken this image, I probably would have liked a little bit more space at the bottom. I feel like the leopard is very, very close to the bottom of the frame. However, you can then just use a generative fill inside Photoshop just to generate a little bit more space there. The generative fill is pretty good at adding in a little bit of space where there's a lot of texture like this in the grass. So there is that option there. And I think in this edited example, Louis might have done that. But I would say in this example, I might have zoomed out a little bit more just to sort of emphasize the isolation in the scene. If there was a lot more space, the leopard would feel a lot more isolated. But I actually quite like this framing here. Like I said, I would have added a small amount at the bottom. But let's look at ideas with a crop. I would say because the leopard is looking towards the left-hand side, this space on the right-hand side feels a little bit unnecessary to me. I do like the fact that there's all of this space on the top. That is negative space, and that actually adds quite a lot to this image. And I think in this example, because the background is nice and blurred, that creates really nice negative space. Now let's work with this image as it was shot, and let's answer the first question. How would I edit this file? Would I go for a color version like this, which is quite desaturated, or a black and white version? Personally, I think they both work really well, and that very bright background actually creates a real soft aesthetic to this image. So I think emphasizing the background, as Louis has done in both of these, and really brighten that background to create a real minimal shot really works very, very well. In this black and white example, I really like the high contrast, and there's a lot of blown out whites here, which I think works quite well when you're editing in this style. Blowing out the whites really helps, especially with a very bright background, to remove that background completely, and it allows you to focus in on the animal to create quite a striking image. And in this example, this one works really nicely. I like the space at the top. Now, if you look at this raw file here, there wasn't a lot of space above the leopard, but just by increasing the canvas here, which is pure white, I think that works really nicely. It helps isolate the leopard a little bit more and just helps tell a bit more of a story of this animal in the landscape. Let's look at this color version. This color version is a lot more zoomed in, which I like. I like the soft colors and almost the soft green, almost bluey tone to the grass, which offsets nicely against this leopard here. And again, the background in this raw file is very bright, and I think blowing out that background there works really nicely to really emphasize the subject in this example. And it creates a really nice artistic impression on this image. So in terms of editing on this black and white image, I don't think I would change anything. I think this one is perfect. And then on this color one here, I think desaturating the colors nicely, like Louis did in this example, works really nicely. I would say the only critique I have on this image is perhaps the composition. I would like that little bit more space at the bottom here. But overall, I think this, for me, the color version would be the one I would go for if I really had to choose. This next image, submitted by Richard, is a beautiful shot of two Impala. And when Richard submitted this image, he wanted to emphasize the light and the dust being kicked up by the Impala and also remove the attention from the background and try help the subject stand out. So if I have to analyze this raw file, I would say the image needs a very slight crop like that, just to straighten that horizon line there. Now, in terms of what's distracting me in this image, I would say the sky on the top here is a little bit distracting. If the trees had ended roughly where the left area and the right area ended, I would say you could leave the sky in. But for this example, I think removing the sky helps create a little bit more intimacy with the subject. It obviously brings the subject a bit larger into frame, but also removing that sky, it helps emphasize that mood a little bit more that Richard is looking for in this image. So I would crop it like that. You could either go for quite a panoramic crop, or you could go for a more traditional crop in that sort of sense. And what I quite like in the background is I wouldn't crop close to any trunks of trees in the background here. I quite like, let's just add a little bit more there. I quite like that tree in the background in this one. That's almost adding a nice stability to the frame there. So I wouldn't go in and crop almost on a trunk like that or cut that off there. I would include that because that's a nice element of the environments where these animals are. So I think including environment sometimes in shots like this really helps bring forward a better story in the image. This bottom piece is questionable. You could just darken that to get rid of that distraction there. So I would probably crop it like that. But let's have a look at Richard's edit. You can see there he has also cropped away some of the distracting sky elements, which I really like. This part of the image here, he's cropped quite close to that tree, which I think does work. It does eliminate the dung there as well, which helps just simplify the image. Now, in terms of drawing attention away from the background and also emphasizing the light, I think he's done a really nice job here at emphasizing that light and the dust being kicked up, catching that light. That is really a very important element in the scene, which I think he has brought out very well. Now, I'm not exactly sure how he did that, but I would assume perhaps using a brush, just increasing some of the saturation and some of the whites or the highlights, perhaps some exposure in those areas. He possibly brought up those details like that. I would say the one competing element for me in this image is the color. If you look at the beautiful orange in the dust in that foreground here, I feel like that is competing a little bit for attention with the background. And I think the colors in the background should be desaturated somewhat and brought more in line with the mood being created in this foreground here. So if I had to offer advice on how to improve this edit, I would definitely get rid of the purple in the background. I'm assuming it's purple there. You can see as I desaturate, there's a lot of purple there. Just desaturating that slightly. Some of the magenta as well. You can see there's magenta. You could also adjust the color of the purple and the color of the magenta, making it a little bit cooler. Let's just see if there's any red in this image. It's quite a bit. So let's just adjust and desaturate the red slightly. What color does this tree fall on here? That's magenta, quite a bit of magenta there. So I would definitely desaturate that. And then what you could actually do is to bring in a little bit more mood and color into this section here. I'm going to add a radial gradient just over this portion there. I might just increase the blacks very slightly just to roll off a little bit of contrast from that area. And then I might just warm that up a little bit. Add in some negative dehaze. We want to add in a little bit of haze and almost creates a little bit of a lighting effect on that background, which just helps bring in a little bit more mood, but it also helps the image feel a little bit more cohesive. So if you look at the image before I took away that purple and added that warm light on the side there, and until now, the image feels a bit more cohesive, and I feel like it takes away a little bit of distraction from that background. Might just increase the side of this radial gradient here just to further emphasize some of that there. And what I might then do is just add in a little bit of blue back into the overall image and perhaps just darken some of that blue there. Just adjusting the color. And just trying to balance out that blue to offset nicely against the warmth in that image. I would then perhaps add a little bit of a vignette effect, mainly just coming in from the right-hand side. I'm just going to darken the very right-hand side of the image very slightly. Just helps create a little bit more emphasis of that side light coming in there. Showing you the mistakes photographers make is a great way to learn editing, but the best way to improve is by seeing all the skills in action, which you can do here in this full Lightroom edit.